The Moabites, a people whose history is deeply woven into the biblical narrative, emerge as mysterious and often ominous figures in Scripture. As descendants of Lot, the nephew of Abraham, the Moabites carry a legacy that continues to challenge and fascinate scholars. They are not merely a distant and forgotten tribe. The Moabites symbolize the ongoing battle between the forces of good and evil, between divine covenants and human defiance. Their presence in the Bible is deliberate, serving as a powerful reminder of the consequences of actions driven by desperation and the struggle for survival in a harsh world. The name Moab itself carries a heavy significance. Meaning from the father, it is a bitter reminder of the incestuous origins that marked the beginning of this nation. This dark genesis not only defines the Moabites, but also shapes how they are perceived and treated throughout biblical history. The Bible, with its meticulous and detailed account, shows us that the Moabites were not just external adversaries of Israel, but also a reflection of the failures and temptations that surrounded the chosen people. They served as a continual reminder that fidelity to God was crucial to avoid the corruption that plagued the surrounding nations. Geographically, Moab was located to the east of the Dead Sea, in a land that, though fertile, was often contested due to its strategic importance. The Moabites inhabited a region that offered both wealth and opportunity, but also placed them in direct conflict with Israel. This proximity led to a fraught relationship, where alliances and wars alternated in an almost cyclical pattern. The Bible records these conflicts with a clarity that reveals Moab was not just a neighboring nation, but a constant test of Israel's faith and morality. Throughout biblical history, the Moabites played a key role in events that shaped Israel's destiny. Their actions, whether as allies or enemies, left a lasting impact on biblical narratives. They are remembered not only for their battles and confrontations, but also for the lessons they imparted, which subtly permeate the biblical stories. Every mention of the Moabites carries a warning or a lesson for God's people, and by extension, for all who seek to understand the deeper teachings of the Bible. The story of the Moabites begins in a context of despair and isolation. Shortly after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot, Abraham's nephew, found himself in a dire situation, taking refuge in the mountains with his two daughters after losing everything. The Bible recounts this moment with a raw intensity that reflects their state of panic and survival. Fearing the extinction of their father's lineage, Lot's daughters made a drastic decision that would echo through generations. They intoxicated Lot and conceived children with him. This act, born out of desperation, led to the birth of Moab, the forefather of the Moabites. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was not just a catastrophic event, but a pivotal moment in human history, where divine judgment intersected with human frailty. Lot and his daughter's escape is depicted with such intensity that it prompts reflection on the choices made in desperate times. They were not only preserving their lives, but also attempting to safeguard the remnants of their family, even if it meant crossing moral boundaries. The Bible presents this story in a stark, unembellished manner, revealing the complexity of human motivations and the far-reaching consequences that follow. The incestuous act that gave rise to Moab and his brother Ammon is one of the most contentious episodes in the Bible. It serves not only as a historical account, but also as a meditation on the limits of morality in times of crisis. The Bible does not shy away from exposing the errors and flaws of its characters. Rather, it reveals them so that we may learn from their experiences. The story of Lot and his daughters is a poignant reminder that actions taken in moments of despair can have enduring repercussions, shaping the destinies of entire peoples. This narrative urges us to reflect on the choices we might make in similar circumstances and how those decisions could reverberate into the future. The spiritual and moral consequences of this act were profound for both the Moabites and the Israelites. The Moabites, descendants of an act of desperation and survival, carried within themselves a mark that would influence their relations with Israel throughout the centuries. The Bible teaches us that the actions of ancestors can influence generations, but it also gives us hope by showing that, even in the midst of troubled origins, it is possible to find redemption and purpose. As the years passed, Moab did not remain a small, isolated tribe. They became a strong and feared nation, whose influence extended over vast areas. The first kings of Moab, powerful and determined figures, knew how to consolidate power in their hands, transforming Moab into a significant force in the region. These rulers, with cunning and determination, built fortified cities and developed a social structure that allowed the Moabite nation to flourish amidst adversity. The Bible shows us that despite their troubled origins, the Moabites managed to establish themselves as a respected and feared people. Moab's fortified cities were a testament to its resilience and survival. They were imposing cities, surrounded by high, impenetrable walls, designed to protect the Moabite people from invaders and to demonstrate their strength. The Bible mentions these cities as centers of power, where Moabite kings made decisions that would affect not only Moab, but also the surrounding nations. These fortresses were more than just structures. They were symbols of a people who had overcome their humble origins to become a regional power. The Moabite economy, based on agriculture and trade, was another pillar that supported the rise of Moab. The fertile lands of Moab, watered by the rivers that crossed the region, allowed the production of abundant food, guaranteeing the nation's prosperity. Trade with other nations also brought wealth and cultural influences, further strengthening Moab's position in the biblical scenario. The Mesha Stela, one of the most important historical records of Moab, gives us a clear picture of how the Moabites saw themselves as a people chosen by their god Chemosh, destined for greatness and prosperity. However, Moab's rise did not come without challenges. Proximity to Israel and other nations often brought the Moabites into military and political conflicts. These confrontations, recorded in detail in the Bible, show that Moab was not only a powerful nation, but also a nation constantly tested. The strength and resilience of the Moabites is a recurring theme in biblical stories, reflecting the eternal struggle between nations, cultures, and beliefs. This rise, although impressive, was always on the verge of being challenged, setting the stage for the conflicts that would follow. The relationship between Moab and Israel is one of the most complex and intriguing in the biblical narrative. Because they were geographically close, these two peoples were destined to cross paths repeatedly, sometimes as allies, sometimes as mortal enemies. From the time of Moses, when the Israelites roamed the desert, Moab was a force to be reckoned with. The proximity, not only geographical, but also cultural and religious, made this relationship a minefield of distrust and rivalry. The Bible reports that this proximity, instead of generating peace, often fueled conflicts and tensions between the two peoples. One of the most striking episodes of this tumultuous relationship was Balaam's curse. Balak, king of Moab, fearing Israel's growing power, attempted to hire the prophet Balaam to curse God's people. This episode, narrated in detail in the Bible, shows the depth of Moabite hostility. Balak believed that only a divine curse could stop the Israelites' advance. However, God turned the curse into a blessing, thwarting Balak's plans and reaffirming his protection over Israel. This event not only intensified the hatred between Moab and Israel, but it also demonstrated that God's hand was firmly upon his chosen people. Another critical moment in the history between Moab and Israel was the Shittim episode, where the seduction and corruption of the Israelites by the Moabites had devastating consequences. The Moabite women, following instructions from their leaders, seduced the men of Israel, leading them to worship the pagan gods, especially Chemosh. This episode resulted in a plague that claimed thousands of lives in Israel, showing the destructive power of idolatry and infidelity to God. The Bible not only describes this event as a betrayal, but also as a stern warning about the dangers of straying from biblical teachings. These events serve as a constant reminder of the fragility of human alliances and the tendency toward corruption that plagues even the most devout. The relationship between Moab and Israel was never simple. It was marked by betrayals, wars, and attempts to subjugate one another. However, it was also a relationship that served as a mirror for human failings and the need for spiritual vigilance. The Moabite religion, centered on the worship of the god Chemosh, was a practice deeply rooted in the culture and identity of the people of Moab. Humos, often described as a god of war and destruction, demanded absolute devotion from his followers, who in turn worshipped him with intense and often dark rituals. The cult of Chemosh was an expression of the power and fear that the Moabites felt in the face of the forces that governed their lives. The Bible offers us disturbing glimpses of this worship, showing how the search for divine protection could lead a people to terrifying extremes. Among the most shocking practices of the Moabites were human sacrifices, which included, in some cases, the offering of children to Chemosh. These rituals, which sought to appease the god's wrath or ensure victories in battles, reveal a society willing to make unimaginable sacrifices in the name of devotion. The Bible severely condemns these practices, classifying them as abominations in the eyes of God. This condemnation was not only moral, but also spiritual, reflecting the complete incompatibility between biblical teachings and the pagan practices of Moab. Moabite rituals, which included feasts, processions, and offerings, were designed to maintain Chemosh's favor and ensure the nation's prosperity. However, these rituals also symbolized the profound separation between Moab and Israel, not only in terms of religious practices, but also in the way each nation viewed the world and the divine. The worship of Chemosh, with its emphasis on sacrifices and blood rituals, contrasted sharply with the faith of Israel, which was based on a covenant of love and obedience with the one God. The Bible highlights these differences to underline the importance of maintaining the purity of faith and resisting external influences. The biblical condemnation of the cult of Chemosh is explicit and blunt. Prophets such as Isaiah and Jeremiah pronounced harsh judgments against Moab, predicting his destruction as a result of his idolatry. These divine judgments were not only a reflection of God's wrath, but also a warning to Israel and all who read the scriptures. The story of Moab serves as a reminder of the consequences of straying from biblical teachings and embracing practices that dishonor God. The story of Ruth, a Moabite woman who became an integral part of Israel's history, is one of the most touching and unexpected narratives in the Bible. Ruth, whose faithfulness and courage made her stand out in the midst of adversity, entered the life of Naomi, an Israelite widow, at a time of great sadness and loss. Despite cultural and religious differences, Ruth chose to follow her mother-in-law back to Bethlehem, declaring with stirring conviction, "Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." This decision marked the beginning of a journey that would lead her to become part of the lineage of David and, consequently, of Jesus Christ. Ruth's marriage to Boaz, a relative of Naomi, was more than a union of convenience. It was an act of redemption that reflected the deep spiritual connections between Israel and Moab. Boaz, as redeemer, not only accepted Ruth as his wife, but also restored Naomi's dignity and security. This marriage, far from being just a social contract, symbolized the inclusion of a foreign people, often considered enemies, in Israel's divine covenant. The Bible teaches us, through Ruth, that God's grace and mercy are extended to everyone, regardless of their origin. Ruth, upon becoming King David's great-grandmother, was directly integrated into the messianic lineage, showing that God, in his sovereignty, can transform the most unlikely circumstances into eternal blessings. The spiritual and theological significance of this inclusion is profound. It reveals that the divine plan of redemption encompasses all nations and peoples. Ruth's story is not only a narrative of love and loyalty, but also a powerful testimony of how God can use the least expected people to fulfill his purposes. Its inclusion in the genealogy of Jesus underlines the universality of salvation and the reach of divine grace. The story of Ruth and her connection to the lineage of David continues to be a beacon of hope for all who feel marginalized or excluded. The Bible reminds us, through this story, that it doesn't matter where we come from, but rather where we are going and who we choose to follow. Ruth, a Moabite, teaches us that faith and loyalty have the power to transcend cultural and spiritual barriers, connecting us to God's eternal purpose. The biblical prophets, in their divinely inspired missions, often turned to Moab, pronouncing severe judgments against this nation that defied God's designs. Isaiah, the great prophet, was one of the first to raise his voice against Moab, predicting a future of desolation and ruin. He not only prophesied the physical destruction of the Moabite cities, but also announced the collapse of their social and religious structure. Isaiah's words echoed like thunder, reminding Moab and all the nations that pride and idolatry have a high price before the God of Israel. Jeremiah, another giant among the prophets, continued the proclamation of judgment on Moab. He described in vivid detail the imminent fall of Moab, predicting that its strongholds would be destroyed and its people would be taken into captivity. Jeremiah did not simply announce destruction, he also mourned deeply for the Moabite people, demonstrating that despite his mission of judgment, there was compassion in God's heart for those who perished in their own stubbornness. This duality of judgment and compassion is one of the most powerful aspects of the biblical stories, showing that God is just, but also deeply sensitive to human suffering. Ezekiel, known for his impressive and symbolic visions, also joined the chorus of prophets who announced the fall of Moab. In his visions, he saw the complete annihilation of Moab's power structures as well as the scattering of its people. However, like his predecessors, Ezekiel didn't see this as an act of cruelty, but as an inevitable consequence of Moab's continued rebellion against God. The Bible, through these prophecies, teaches us that divine patience has limits, and that justice, when it finally arrives, is as complete as it is inevitable. These announcements of destruction were not just empty words. They were fulfilled with a precision that reinforces the veracity of the scriptures. The prophecies against Moab serve as a reminder that although God is merciful, he is also just, and his judgment is certain. The story of Moab, intertwined with these prophecies, challenges us to consider our own lives and the way we respond to divine warnings. Like Moab, we may find ourselves on a path that leads to destruction, but the Bible offers us a chance at redemption if we are willing to listen and change. The fall of Moab is one of the darkest episodes in biblical history, marking the end of a nation that, for a long time, defied divine laws. Moab, which once rose as a regional power, saw its kingdom crumble under the pressure of foreign invasions. The combined forces of his enemies, motivated by internal weakness and the wrath of God, overthrew his fortified cities and destroyed his army. The Bible narrates these events with a precision that makes us feel the pain of defeat and the emptiness left by the destruction of an entire nation. One of the most notable episodes during this decline was the rebellion led by King Mesha, documented on the Mesha Stela, one of the most significant artifacts attesting to Moab's history. The stela recounts Mesha's intense efforts to reclaim Moab's independence after years of subjugation by Israel. Although initially successful, the rebellion was ultimately crushed, leading to even greater devastation for Moab. This tragic event serves as a powerful reminder that pride and stubbornness can lead to downfall, a theme frequently echoed in biblical narratives. With Moab's final defeat, the remnants of its people were absorbed into emerging empires like the Assyrians and Babylonians. The Bible notes how the once proud and independent Moabites were reduced to servitude and exile, scattered across foreign lands. This dispersion marked the end of Moab as a distinct political and cultural entity. However, even amid destruction and dispersion, Moab's history was not erased. The Bible preserves their memory not merely as a historical record, but as an enduring warning to all nations that defy divine law. The fall of Moab, though tragic, represents a crucial chapter in the biblical narrative, reminding us of the inevitable consequences of straying from God's path. Moab's absorption into other empires signaled the end of its identity as a nation, but the lessons it left behind persisted. The Bible uses the fall of Moab to illustrate the fragility of earthly kingdoms and the importance of maintaining faith and obedience to God. The fate of Moab prompts reflection on our own lives and the choices we make, reminding us that true security is found not in power or human fortifications, but in covenant with God. Archaeological discoveries have illuminated the history of Moab, revealing details that confirm biblical accounts. Excavations in areas that were once part of the ancient kingdom of Moab have uncovered artifacts, inscriptions, and remains of cities that offer insight into Moabite life and culture. The Mesha Stela, in particular, is a crucial piece in this historical puzzle, verifying the existence of Moabite kings and their interactions with Israel. These archaeological findings not only enhance our understanding of the biblical narrative, but also strengthen faith by demonstrating the accuracy of the scriptures. Moab's cultural legacy, though marked by conflict and defeat, also influenced other ancient cultures in the region. Moabite religious practices, architecture, and even language left traces that can be seen among neighboring peoples. By recording the history of Moab, the Bible preserves not only the events, but also the spiritual and cultural lessons they convey. Studying these historical and archaeological aspects deepens our understanding of the context in which biblical stories unfolded, offering a richer and more profound perspective on the ancient world and its complex relationships. The Moabites' legacy in the Bible is filled with lessons about the consequences of poor choices and the relentless pursuit of power outside of God's will. Moab, a people who began in controversial circumstances, followed a path of pride and idolatry that ultimately led to their downfall. The Bible maintains this story as both a warning and a reflection for all of us. The spiritual lessons drawn from the biblical accounts of the Moabites caution against the dangers of straying from faith, unchecked pride, and the temptation to follow false gods. Moab's enduring influence still echoes in the pages of Scripture, providing insights into human nature and the relationship between God and his people. Even amidst destruction, the story of Moab serves as a mirror reflecting our own spiritual struggles and challenges. As we consider the fate of the Moabites, we are encouraged to remain steadfast in faith and learn from the errors of those who came before us. The Bible presents these stories not just for our knowledge, but for our transformation, calling us to live a life of obedience and devotion to God. If you're interested in having a Bible like the one we use in our studies, check out the link in the first pinned comment. If you enjoy our content and can support our channel, consider buying us a coffee through Buy Me a Coffee. Additionally, if you can purchase a crucifix, we also have a link in the first pinned comment. We greatly appreciate your support. God bless and see you in the next video.